So, one of the things we discussed last week was the fact that pretty much America and Australia are going to be selling us chlorinated chicken and hormone beef. Now, here's the thing that often gets asked, and I think should be obvious to someone, but a lot of people either A, don't understand, or just aren't bothered and think that it doesn't matter. But it does. Because here's the thing. What you are putting is you are putting chemicals into a food chain. Now, of course, chemicals already exist in a food chain. Food is essentially made of chemicals. Yeah. But what you are doing is you are artificially putting chemicals into a food chain, such as hormones for example, beef. This makes the cow grow bigger. However, those hormones stay in the beef and are then eaten by us. Now, if you look at America and Australia, one of the things you will find is that a lot of people in those countries have hormone problems. If you want another potentially apocalyptic scenario, look at the, chlorinated chicken. That is an antibiotic. You are putting antibiotics into the food chain. We are already coming to potentially a point where germs could, and they are, with, MSR, the superbug that was resistant to antibiotics. Do you think it's a good idea to put antibiotics and introduce it into a food chain where we already have an actual real world problem of people have been oversubscribed antibiotics and have taken them too much, and this has caused the germs and the viruses to become more resistant, so we're having to take stronger and stronger doses of antibiotics? Do you think this is a good idea, doing this to to the chicken and the beef in a lot of cases, and lamb, to then feed it to humans, and then that antibiotics ends up in our system and gives even stronger, adds even more problem to that antibiotics problem? Do you think that's a good idea? Now, the meat industry for years in America has been fighting that, oh, this is a good thing, this is amazing, yeah. But it's not, because the meat industry, particularly in the UK and all over Europe, when these bans came into place on chlorinated chicken and hormone beef, all these industries said, you can't do that, we'll go out of business. And yet somehow the meat industry in the UK and everywhere else has done, well, remarkably well under these laws. So that's one of the big things. And a lot of people have said, oh, don't eat it. You won't be able to tell. Because, especially in America, you look at GMO, the labelling of GMO products. Now, I'm not against GMO. I think it's a tool, and it's a tool that should be used. However, there are uses where, again, you're using a hammer instead of a screwdriver, and again, using these techniques on these animals to basically keep the meat cheap, and because that's why it's done. It's to keep the meat as cheap as possible, and it's a cost-cutting measure at the end of the day. The European beef meat and lamb industry do this perfectly fine without adding these additives, and can supply meat in the quantities that are still needed. So why then, in these other countries, don't they do it? Well, as I said, it's a cost-cutting measure, because basically it means them spending an extra couple of dollars to buy, good food and, things like that to feed these animals with. But this is an actual problem. This is why you don't want these extra chemicals added to these animals, to these meat products that are now going to be shipped, because you don't want them in your food chain because they can cause more problems. And here's the thing. We know, for example, both, as we've covered recently, both Australia and America have said, we're going to change your law regarding these products because of the meat industry. It's not, where are the Brexiteers screaming about sovereignty about this? They're nowhere. And as I was about to say it, but I didn't. What about, as again, these people go, oh, well, don't eat it. Under the Brexit terms and under these conditions, they will bring in that you are not allowed to label GM food. So you will never, ever be able to know what is hormone-grown beef and what isn't, because they will... the meat industry in America and Australia will regulate that you can't do that. So, to those people who think, oh, it'll be easy, I just won't eat that meat, you won't be able to tell, because it won't be a regulation, as it is now, to label GM products, because of the American meat industry and the Australian meat industry who've said, yeah, you can't label them. You see, people, again, still don't understand that Europe has done a lot more for us than people realise, and this is one of them. They've kept these, chemicals out of our meat products, and as a result, that meat is a lot more healthier for you than it is eating the meat you might get from America and Australia, because they have their meat industry, especially the regulations, are really laxed, and the meat industry puts in these chemicals into their meat products because basically it's cheaper than doing its job properly. Now, tell me that it's a good idea to relax our products and regulations and accept all those. But if you do, you've got to accept that there's going to be higher number of people now with hormone deficiencies or hormone problems. There will be an probably increase at a more rapid rate of MSR, the superbug that's resistant to antibiotics. And that will, again, tick that clock closer to antibiotics becoming completely useless. Why? Because you've been eating antibiotics in your meat and you just haven't realised it. Because, again, the American and Australian meat industries have forced on regulations onto our very vulnerable country that was desperate to do trade agreements that you can't regulate for that. So, once again, Brexit is producing problems, and people aren't thinking at all what these consequences are going to be, what this means for the UK meat industry now having to compete against cheaper products. It doesn't just mean cheaper prices for them, or they have to compete at some level, and Europe allows them to compete on some level, and not only just in Europe but with the rest of the world. We have 60 plus trading agreements with 60 other countries, a couple more now because we've got Mexico, Japan and Canada. So it's just complete lunacy, because when you start to look at the facts, Brexit unravels more and more. The more scrutiny that gets applied on Brexit, the more it starts to unravel.